Hello everyone and welcome to the AFL Analyst. So today we've got a preview of the game between Richmond and the Western Bulldogs. So this will be tonight's game, Friday the 4th of August. So I just want to have a look at this game because it's quite a tight game. Both teams are sort of similarly ranked on the ladder, both fighting for the last few places in the 8. And I just wanted to take a look and break down some of the key differences between the teams statistically. So I'll be just focusing on the ones where there's a large discrepancy in between each team, because obviously the ones where they're really close at, they can sort of mitigate each other and rule those things out as the game goes on because they're both good at those things or both bad at those things. We'll just be looking at the differential, so not averages, just the average differential. So that means the average difference between what they concede or what they're better at. So for instance, we've got here the possession numbers. So for Richmond, on average, they concede 1.5 fewer contested possessions. Or that's what they get themselves. They usually get 1.5 fewer contested possessions per game than their opponents. Whereas the Bulldogs over here, they get 5.8 more contested possessions per game. So that's the differential. So that's what we'll be focusing on. So we'll get straight into it. So as we can see, we've got the contested possessions on the left side here, this scatter plot, and the uncontested possessions on the right sided scatter plot. Now, I like using the scatter plots because we can clearly see sort of the trend lines, and when we're marking it against goals, we can clearly see who excels at contested possessions that leads to higher scoring or higher goals than their opponents. It's quite similar to the one if you watch on the couch when they bring up their scatter plot about your average, where you're ranked defensively and offensively, and they look at this top right-handed quadrant for teams in the premiership window. It's similar to that. So that's what we'll be doing for most of the graphs. But we'll start off with the contested and uncontested possessions. So as we can see, the Dogs are quite strong in both of these areas. We know they like to flick the ball around by hand. They win a lot of hard contested footy and then explode from there. So we can see that the Dogs have a very strong correlation between their contested possession count and whether or not they score more goals than the opposition. So we can see they have a positive 5.8 amount of contested possessions and a 0.4 more goals per game as well in the contested possession area. We can also see by the trend line that this is quite important when scoring contested possessions or winning that count. We can also see that a lot of the top clubs are in the top right here. So we've got the Magpies, the Lions, the Demons, Carlton, who have started to come really good and playing really strong footy. The Saints, who are still somehow in 5th position. And I think that's largely down to how good they are at the contest. And then we've got the Cats and the Crows, who I think most people will think are good sides as well. We can also see that the Suns are really high, but they're below the midway point. So contested possession doesn't have a huge impact on their goals because they're below 0 for goals on the left here. Same with Hawthorn. They're very strong at winning contested possession, but they're below the goal count. And then teams in the top left here, contested possession doesn't influence the amount of goals they score, although they do have a positive record for goals or their differential for goals. So it's the Swans here. It's not hugely important to them scoring, but for the Dogs or the Saints or the Blues, it definitely would be. Same with the uncontested possessions. We can see here that the Bulldogs, that's very important to them as well. They actually average 12.5 more uncontested possessions a game, which is quite stark when we consider that Richmond concede 9.3 uncontested possessions a game. So that's roughly a 20 to 21 possession difference. So that can be really crucial in the grand scheme of a game across 4 quarters. Just having those 5 extra uncontested possessions a quarter, can lead to more goals. So we can see the same thing in the contested possession graph. So we can see the Bulldogs 5.8 and the Tigers are minus 1.5. So there's about a 7.5 point difference here. So that can be really crucial. So, if you're a super coach player or a fantasy player, or, you like to have a bet on the footy, I would look at players like Tom Liberatore, Jack McRae, Marcus Bontempelli to have a high number of contested possessions in this game because Richmond do concede contested possessions. And then for the uncontested possession mark, expect Bailey Smith to have, and the Bulldogs halfbacks to have a large amount of uncontested possessions. That depends where Bailey Smith plays. If he's on the wing, he will probably get more uncontested possessions, but if he gets mixed on the ball, he'll probably be more even. I just wanted to touch on this a bit more because I like to look back at the team's past 5 games. And we'll just take Richmond in this example. So their last game was against the Demons, in which they lost by about 6 goals. And just have a look at their possession numbers. So they were quite even in contested possession. They lost it 139 to 144. Where the Demons really beat them was uncontested possessions. The Demons won 213 to 183, which is a 30-point difference. So that's quite close to what we've already got between these two teams, the Bulldogs and the Tigers. It's already about 20. So that run and spread that the Bulldogs can get, expect that to have a large say on the game. Again, 5 weeks ago, they also played Brisbane. I know the Demons and Brisbane are very strong teams. They're top 4 clubs. I would say the Doggies are just a bit below that. So they're similar enough to compare the two teams. So when they played Brisbane, they lost against Brisbane quite convincingly, and Brisbane really dominated possession. They won 138 contested possessions to 112 and 237 uncontested possessions to 184. It's really hard to score a goal when you don't have the football, so expect these statistics to have a large say in the game. But we'll move on quickly because I don't want to make this video too long. As we can see with the clearances, they're very important to the Dogs in terms of their ability to score goals. I think we know that they're a high clearance team. They average, 1 more clearance a game than their opponents, and then 5.5 more stoppage clearances. On the other scheme of things, we've got the Tigers, who average 2.3 less centre clearances a game and about 0.7 less stoppage clearances a game, which is fairly even. But we can see a lot of the top clubs excel in the top right here in terms of clearances. The Lions, Demons, Power, the Blues, they really dominate this area. You can also see the Magpies are up high for centre clearances, although it's not quite important to win stoppage clearances for them. But looking back at Richmond's clearance ability in their last 5 games, in the game they lost against Melbourne, they lost clearances 49 to 40, and lost centre clearances 18 to 15, stoppage clearances 31 to 25. So they had a fair say on the outcome, having 10 more clearances and dominating both. Well, not really dominating, but winning the centre clearance and stoppage clearance battles. Definitely had a fair say in Melbourne's ability to push the ball forward. If we look at Richmond's game against Hawthorn, in which they only won by a point and really had to come from behind to win that, Hawthorn really dominated the centre clearances. They won centre clearance 19 to 10. But Richmond were able to claw back the stoppage clearances, which they're a bit better at, 27 to 21. But Hawthorn still managed to win that area 40-37 overall. So that was a really close game. And I expect if the Dogs are able to get on top in the clearance battle, as they are with contested possession, then that could have a real say in this game. And it may be very difficult for the Tigers to claw that difference back on the scoreboard, because we know that it has a fairly positive impact on the Dogs scoring goals. Now for the just more stoppage sort of statistics, because apart from the stoppages, both teams are quite even across all the other stats that I can find on the internet. That's free to view. Obviously Champion Data, they keep those in-house, so they don't declare those to the public. So these are stats that I can find on public forums and websites. So as we can see, the hitouts, they're not quite important for the Tigers scoring. Or they are, but they still concede more goals, unfortunately for them. But they are important to the Tigers. They do have a plus 7.3. It's not important to the whole competition. We can see the trend line. It's not totally important to win hit-out numbers. That doesn't really help you score more goals, but we can see that the Bulldogs concede 8.5 a game, whereas the Tigers win 7.3 more hit-outs a game. And with Toby Nankervis back and Soldo still on the team, they will have a strong ruck combination. Obviously, Tim English doesn't win a lot of hit-outs. He's much better around the ground. So, of course, if you're a betting person, it may be a good thing to have a look at maybe Toby Nankervis or Ivan Solo winning a lot of hit-outs. or maybe just the Tigers in general winning the hit-out count by a certain margin. I'm not sure if you can bet on that. I'm not a large gambler myself, but that would be something interesting to watch. But then we look at just these clearances in the whole, as a whole, we can see that the hit-outs don't really impact the Bulldogs being able to win clearance. They win 6.5 more clearances total per game, and the Tigers lose 3. So the hit-out numbers won't do much for this game. And we can see that in Richmond's game against Brisbane, where they just about drew hit-outs 40-38, but Brisbane still won total clearance 46-22. However, we can see against Richmond's game against Sydney, in which they won hit-outs 49-33, and that resulted in a higher win percentage in their clearances. They won clearance 47-31 in that game and dominated centre clearance, winning 19-7. So the hit-outs could have a say, but just due to the Dogs not really winning hit-outs anyway and winning clearances like Brisbane are quite weak in hit-outs but strong in the clearances, I say that'll go the way of the Dogs again. They'll dominate the stoppages. Now, the inside 50s and marks inside 50 were another statistic where there was a bit of a discrepancy between the two sides. As we can see, Richmond have 4.5 or just about 4.5 fewer inside 50s per game, whereas the Dogs have just about the opposite. They have plus 4.5 inside 50s per game. And as we can see, it's a very positive trend line for goals, or higher goal scoring, a positive goal difference, which is to be expected. You've got to get it inside 50 to score. It's very hard to score it from half back in one kick. You've got to get it inside 50. But for the Tigers to be this far back is quite concerning, considering they're playing a team that's going to win the football a lot more and then get it inside 50. And as we'll see on the next slide, the Bulldogs are fairly efficient at scoring goals once they get it in there. So as we'll see, the Dogs have a 4.7 positive difference. And then we look at the marks inside 50. They also have a positive 0.3 marks per game against their opposition. So they do mark the ball more often inside 50. However, the Tigers do also have a plus 1.7. So expect the Tigers to be quite effective when they go inside 50 also, but they'll have less chances to do so, considering there's about a 9 inside 50 count gap between the two sides. So that may be what it comes down to, just the amount of chances they're able to generate for their teams, because Richmond can be very effective when they get it in there, but they may just not be able to get it in there enough, which has been the theme, I think, when they've played some of these stronger sides that are up here in the top right hand side of the graphs or scatter plots as we've gone through the sheets. Then finally, just to touch on the goal efficiency, as I said before, we can see that for goal accuracy, the Bulldogs are 12th, so they're quite poor in front of goal, whereas the Tigers are 4th. So it could come down to this, just Tigers being able to take their chances when they've got them. However, the Dogs may generate more scoring shots, which may mitigate that 12th ranked accuracy. Also, as we can see for the goal efficiency per inside 50, the Dogs are 7th at being able to score a goal once they get it in there, whereas the Tigers are 2nd. So the Tigers will be very effective. The game may be close, but I think the Dogs will probably be a 3 to 4 goal better side, just based on volume they can get into their forward line, and still being quite adept at turning those inside 50s into chances to score goals. I think the contested possession or stoppage area of the game will go heavily in the favour of the Bulldogs. Players like Tim Taranto may have good games because the Dogs like to keep it in tight, but I think over the course of 4 quarters, it will really come to the fore how prominent the Dogs were at the contest and how much they had an impact on the game. So I do think the Dogs will probably win by about 3 to 4 goals. Expect Tom Liberatore, Marcus Bontempelli, Jack McRae, those really good in and under contested possession beasts to win a lot of football, as with Tim Taranto. Expect Aaron Norton to get a lot of chances to take a lot of big grabs, so his contested mark numbers may be quite high. And also expect Richmond's forwards to be quite accurate. I think they won't score many behinds. They'll definitely score a lot of goals, but they may just not get the volume to score enough goals to beat the Dogs. Also expect the ruck battle to be interesting. Obviously Tim English is probably the best ruckman in the game, particularly besides Max Gawn, because of what he can do around the ground. But at the stoppages, expect Soldo and Nankervis to exert themselves, although the Dogs ground ball players will have more of an impact on actual goal scoring. Thank you for watching. If you've got any thoughts on the game, or you come here after the game's been played, obviously, these are predictions. They're not always going to come true, but I do welcome if something goes totally opposite to what I've said. Definitely comment it down below. It creates good discussion, and we're just here to have a bit of fun and watch some footy. So I hope your team wins on the weekend, and you also have a great weekend yourself. But thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.